and talks about Jesus' death, really, even though it's written 600 years before, I suppose. Isaiah chapter 53 and beginning at verse 1. Who has believed what we have heard? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of a dry ground. He had no form or comeliness that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that made us whole, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. And they made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When he makes himself an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the fruit of the travail of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Let us pray. Dear Lord, possibly could to get started to Romans, but it is really quite a task. One of the things I do see, I just can't preach, the sermons again that I preached years ago. They're great, and maybe at times I will, but the richness of God's Word just flows in upon me. I can't say other than that. It sounds very holy and very learned, but I don't mean it to be. But it's just, I can't, I don't know if I know so much more. Maybe I know less, but it certainly seems so rich, the Romans. And so all I can do today is to touch upon part of it. I was involved in doing, as Irene saw me doing, complicated pictures on the computer of the stars and the galaxies. Yes, but so I'll hope to bring some of that to you. Oh, who knows? Maybe this evening or next Sunday or the following Sunday. But this, of course, is so full of truth and richness that I can just touch upon a little of it in the first verse. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. And really all I'm going to touch upon is the very first phrase, a servant of Jesus Christ, you know. And what did come home to me with Jesus Christ was it's really important for us to remember who he is. And you can do that. I can do that quickly in the verse that we all know so well, Colossians 1 and verse 15. Colossians 1 and 15 is page 1026. Colossians 1 and 15. He is, and this is where I was working on the galaxies, and I still have a diagram that I'll maybe show you sometime today or next day. But he is the image. Jesus, Colossians 1:15, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or principalities or dominions or principalities or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. He is, and you know, it just sets you back on your heels. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the church, the body of the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. You know, that's the Jesus Christ, you know. And I said that because I think it's so often easy for us to say, oh yeah, a servant of Jesus Christ. Oh yes, you know who that is. I mean, Jesus is the one who speaks inside me at times and who lived in the first century. And he is the before all things. In him everything was made that was made. All things hold together in him. And I mean, I have a wonderful picture of the galaxies, and all of them hold together in him. And so, of course, it brings home to you, a servant of Jesus Christ. That is a great privilege. And of course, the word servant is doulos, and it really means a slave or a bondservant. A bondservant who has given up any right to himself and has given himself completely over to the owner of his master. A bondservant is one who just does with no question what his master tells him, but particularly when his master is not some little guy who going around Galilee or some little local preacher, but particularly when he is the person in whom all the galaxies were made, in whom all the stars hold together, in whom our own body with its billions and billions of neutrons and protons holds together. He is the one of whom we are slaves. And what came home to me in connection with the communion is, well, he's a kind of advisor to me. He's a kind of advisor. I'm a kind of advisee. I'm the one that he advises, and then, like all financial advisors, I may obey him, I may not obey him. And I thought, how often does it describe us? How often, you know? Because of course the slave is unquestioning. in his obedience. And you know, if you saw that, I don't know if you saw the movie Slave, for 12 years, 12 years a slave. Immediately. You act immediately. A slave obeys unquestioningly. Unquestioningly. And I think each of us know, actually, that our own spiritual health does deteriorate when we regard him as an advisor. It does deteriorate. When we argue with ourselves, well, I need to think about that. Or I need to work out the consequences of doing that. Or, of course, worse, when we really don't want to do it. And far from being a slave who unquestioningly obeys his master, we try to be the devil's advocate and work out maybe there are better ways to do this. Or maybe we don't really need to do this. And it seems to me that the cancer gets in that way. We sense something from Christ's heart. We sense something that he is saying we should do, but we wonder, did he really say that? Does that have to be done? Does it need to be done now? Maybe it's just my conscience. Maybe it's just my overruling legalism. And it's so easy, it seems to me, to not be a slave at all, you know, and to be so busy trying to avoid erring on the legalistic side, trying to avoid being silly or being just a little machine. It's so easy on the basis of those protests to hold off. And then I don't know when it is, you know, when you find out there's a whole trail of things that have kind of piled up, you know, that just have piled up behind you, so that now they're rather a burden. Moreover, you're glad that you don't hear them so often now. You've kind of dealt with them. And then you wonder, you know, why there seems to have come some fatness into your life, or some deadness, or some lack of aliveness to Jesus' voice. And it seems to me it ties up with this business, doulos. Are you a doulos Jesu Christou, you know? Are you a slave of Jesus Christ? Or are you just, maybe as the English word so often means here, just a servant? As good a servant as you can be, but not a slave. And maybe are you at times not even a servant, but just an advisee, somebody who has Jesus Christ as a kind of advisor that tells you what would be a good idea to do. So it seemed to me, you know, that Paul was very definite about how to have guidance in your life. He said, be a slave of Jesus Christ. And especially, of course, when you realize who he is, that he's, of course, the Son of our Maker, and that he's the one in whom all things were made, then he probably knows best. He probably knows best. But where I think it's easy to go wrong is you can be assured, of course, he knows best, but the timing may not be right. And so you hold off because of the timing, but actually you end up holding off permanently. So I think it's worth thinking of. If you said to me, well, now, wait a minute, there's the great danger of deception, and there's a great danger of being legalistic, and there's a great danger of doing a thing for the wrong reason. Yeah, but, unless it's something like murder that is so plainly not what Jesus is saying, I'd rather err on the right side, the wrong side, than the wrong side. And besides, it seems to me it's possible to take a step forward in the direction that you sense Jesus is saying, and then keep your eyes open and your ears open and your mind alive. And watch out for any corrections that he brings to your mind through somebody else saying something, or through you reading something or reflecting upon it. But it's possible, it seems to me, and safer, to err on the side of obeying Jesus when he tells you, and trusting him to bring to your remembrance if it's not his will. It's safer to do that than to err on the other side and say, maybe that wasn't him at all. But I don't know about you. I don't know that they're always so uncertain anyway as that. I don't know that those are the ones that do the great harm. I think the ones that do the great harm to our spiritual life are when we do think it's Jesus. And we, as the man in the Bible said, put it off to a more convenient season. And we just step away from the thing, and often step off from a whole wealth of life that he has for us. So Jesus, Paul, a servant, but a slave of Jesus Christ. Let us pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for your goodness to us. And we thank you for